Hello, philosophy time. Time for another reading from The Wise Heart from Jack Kornfield, chapter 2. Gonna continue where we left off last time with compassion is our nature. From the perspective of Buddhist psychology, compassion is natural. It derives from our interconnection, which Buddhist calls interdependence. This can be readily seen in the physical world. In the womb, every child is interdependent on his mother's body. If either of them is sick, the other is affected. In the same way, we are interdependent with the body of the earth. The minerals of the soil make up our wheat and our bones. The storm clouds become our drinks and our blood. The oxygen of the trees and the forests is the air we breathe. The more consciously we realize this shared destiny, the more compassion arises for the earth itself. The human community is equally interconnected. Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu puts it simply. In Africa, when you ask someone, "How are you?" the reply you get is the plural, even when you are speaking to one person. A man would say, "We are well," "We are not well." He himself may be quite well, but his grandmother is not well, so he is not well either. The solitary, isolated human being is really a contradiction in terms. Fortunately, we are becoming more and more aware of our global interconnection. Every meal we eat is intertwined with the sweat of farmers, migrant workers, and long-haul truckers. It depends on the global climate and the earthworms in our soil, centuries of experimentation in crop rotation, and Gregory Mendel's scientific breakthroughs in seed selection. Its roots extend from the earliest agriculture in Mesopotamia and China to this morning's market rates at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Just as we are interdependent with the earth and with one another, we are also connected in consciousness. Western psychology does not yet acknowledge this, but it is true. Years ago, my wife and I were studying at an ashram in the mountains of India, and my wife had a very clear but difficult vision of a death in her family. I tried to reassure her that images of death were simply part of the meditation process. Sadly, I was wrong. 10 days later, we received a telegram that began, "Your brother Paul has died." When we read further, we discovered that the telegram was sent on the day of her vision and that Paul had died on that day in the exact manner that she had seen. We have all heard stories like this. This is because we are connected in consciousness. This fact is the basis for compassion. There is a neurological basis for compassion as well. In the 1980s, Italian scientist Giacomo Rizzolatti and his colleagues discovered a class of brain cells called mirror neurons. Extensive research since that time has shown that through our mirror neurons, we actually feel the emotions, movements, and intentions of others. Research describes this natural empathy as a part of the social brain, a neural circuitry that connects us intimately in every human encounter. In Buddhist psychology, compassion is not a struggle or a sacrifice. Within our body, compassion is natural and intuitive. We don't think, "Oh, my poor toe or finger is hurt. Maybe I should help it." As soon as it is injured, we instantly respond because it is a part of us. Through meditation, we gradually open up the boundaries of consciousness to compassion for all beings, as if they were part of our family. We learn that even when our compassion is lost through fear and trauma, it can be reawakened. Faced with a crying child in a burning house, a hardened criminal is as likely as anyone to take the risk of rescuing her. We all have moments when the openness and beauty of our Buddha nature shine. D.S. Barnett, writing in the magazine The Sun, shows how compassion can bloom even in the midst of a terrible childhood. Mother always assured me that unspeakable punishments were bound to befall any child as naughty as I was. "If I were you," she'd say, "I'd be afraid to go to sleep at night, for fear God would strike me dead." She would speak these words softly, regretfully, as though saddened by her errant daughter's fate. After describing years of abuse and violation, Burnett goes on, "The most devastating words my mother ever spoke to me came when I asked her if she loved me. She answered, 'How could anyone ever love you?' It took me almost 50 years to heal the damage from all her ugly remarks." Then she relates a childhood ritual that helped her survive. "From the age of 5 or 6 until I was in my teens, whenever I had trouble sleeping, I would slip out from under my covers and steal into the kitchen for a bit of bread or cheese, which I would carry back to bed with me. There, I'd pretend my hands belonged to someone else, a comforting, reassuring being without a name, an angel perhaps. The right hand would feed me a little bit of cheese or bread as the left hand stroked my cheeks and hair. My eyes closed, I would whisper softly to myself, There, go to sleep. You're safe now. Everything will be all right. I love you." Describing the life-denying landscape of her childhood, Burnett shows how caring floods through us like an inner angel of mercy, like green shoots forcing their way through the cracks in the sidewalk. We can see the natural hand of compassion in all the ways that we try to keep ourselves from harm in 1,000 daily gestures of self-protection. Compassion is courage. As children, many of us were taught courage in the form of warrior or the explorer, bravely facing danger. In the Buddhist understanding, however, great courage is not demonstrated by aggression or ambition. Aggression and ambition are more often expressions of fear and delusion. The courageous heart is the one that is unafraid to open to the world. With compassion, we come to trust our capacity to open to life without armoring. As the poet Riechle reminds us, ultimately, it is our own vulnerability that we depend. This is not a poetic ideal, but a living reality demonstrated by our most beloved sages. Mahatma Gandhi had the courage to be jailed and beaten, to persevere through difficulties without giving in to bitterness and despair. His vulnerability became his strength. We need this same courage to pass through a difficult divorce without lashing out and increase the pain and anguish. We need it when our children are in trouble, when things go wrong at work. And in all these situations, we are vulnerable, and everyone involved needs compassion. Buddhist teachings often speak of compassion for all beings, but for most of us, compassion is developed one person and one difficult situation at a time. Novelist Anne Patchett writes during the First Gulf War, "Put it this way, when it gets down to one life, the mind achieves a vivid understanding. If I take the deaths in all at one time, I noticed that Marine Lance Corporal E. Linderman Jr. of Douglas, Oregon was only 19, and I know what it's like to be 19. And I noticed there wasn't a standard military portrait taken of Marine Private First Class Dion J. Stevenson of Bountiful, Utah, and so they used his prom picture, and you can see the hook on the strap of his bow tie. After you look at these pictures, the war becomes difficult to follow, because to be decent, you have to stop and love them and mourn their passing, and there are getting to be so many of them that it's possible not to fall behind." Martin Luther King Jr. exhorted us, "Never succumb to the temptation of becoming bitter. As you press for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the instruments of love." At the worst times, such an attitude may seem impossible. Yet, even though some of King's followers later rejected his precepts of nonviolence, something in us knows that closing down is not the way. Yes, the world is full of pain, uncertainty, and injustice. But in this vulnerable human life, every loss is an opportunity either to shut out the world or to stand up with dignity and let the heart respond. Israeli businessman Yuka Frankelthal faced this choice when his son was murdered by Palestinian gunmen. Only days later, Frankenthal stood before the Israeli Prime Minister's residence and said, "I am unwilling to delegate my ethics to soldiers and politicians. If the security forces were to strike back now and kill innocent Palestinians in retaliation, I would tell them they were no better than my son's killers. Even if they found that his killer was planning another murderous attack, if he was surrounded by innocent children and civilians, I would say no. Do not seek revenge. Do all you can to avoid and prevent the violence, the death of all Israelis and Palestinians. But do not kill. In my son's name, please listen." He went on to found the Arik Institute, named after his son, which works for reconciliation and peace. Living with compassion does not mean we have to give away all our possessions, take in every homeless person we meet, and fix every difficult situation in our extended family and community. Compassion is not codependence. It does not mean we lose our self-respect or sacrifice ourselves blindly to others. In the West, we are confused about this point. We mistakenly fear that if we become too compassionate, we will be overwhelmed by the suffering of others. But this happens only when our compassion is one-sided. In Buddhist psychology, compassion is a circle that encompasses all beings, including ourselves. Compassion blossoms only when we remember ourselves and others, when the two sides are in harmony. Compassion is not foolish. It does not just go along with what others want so that they will not feel bad. There is a yes in compassion, and there is also a no, said with the same courage of heart. No to abuse, no to racism, no to violence, both personal and worldwide. The no is said not out of hate, but out of unwavering care. Buddhists call this the fierce sword of compassion. It is the powerful no of leaving a destructive family, the agonizing no of allowing an addict to experience the consequences of his actions. Whenever it is practiced, compassion brings us back to life. When a woman named Lavane came to Buddhist practice 3 years after her husband's death, she was angry and depressed. She had closed off from the world as if her loss was unforgivable betrayal. She lived alone, out of contact with old friends and her sister and their children, and she had abandoned the political work that inspired her. Life felt cold, unforgiving, meaningless. Her body grew stiff, and she knew she needed help. Over the 2 months of her meditative retreat, with 1,000 soft breaths, she began to release the pains of her grieving body. She practiced loving kindness and compassion for herself. Then her compassion grew to include all those who, like her, had lost their most beloved family members. Lavane's heart began to ease. One morning she came to me and pulled out of her pocket an egg, a hard-boiled egg she'd kept from breakfast 2 days before. She said it was her heart, round and smooth and warm, and she kept it in her hand all day as she walked and sat. It was her way of holding herself, of bringing the living warmth back to her own grieving heart. Now, she said, I am ready to go back and love the world again. That's beautiful. Let's take care of ourselves so that we can go out there and love the world fully. Have a great day. Go with peace.